again, and welcome to Forum for a Better Understanding. We've been doing this program now for 284 previous programs, and you'd say there must be some repeats in there. Well, there actually aren't, but this one is even more unique than any of the others because we've never touched having a panel come in from the university, from California State, and share with us from their literary professions insights into a major, but perhaps not on everybody's radar, writer, Flannery O'Connor. You may not even know that this is a tremendously gifted writer who is Catholic, who is from the South, who died in 1964, and in her short 39 years left us 3 excellent novels and a small collection of gems of short stories. So we're going to visit now with 2 professors, as I said. Our first one is a very esteemed friend, Howard Hendrix, who is back by, as we say, popular demand. Howard's been on before, and we're so glad to have him back on our panel.
Glad to be back.
And to his side is our new friend Lisa Weston, another professor at Fresno State in the literary department, who happens to be a colleague and also very interested in Flannery O'Connor. So on that note, I wonder is both of you could open up with some insight as to what it is that you most find significant about Flannery O'Connor, and perhaps how it is that you deal with her briefly when you teach, because you would have chances, obviously, to deal with some of her masterful pieces. Howard, could you start?
Sure. Well, I teach O'Connor's work a lot in sort of gen ed, lower division classes at Fresno State. And what is intriguing to me about O'Connor is, although we're looking at her predominantly in terms of religion and ethics, but I'm looking at her as a literary artist predominantly when I'm in the classroom. And it's not that she doesn't have a rose-colored glasses vision of human nature. I mean, it's pretty dark, and it blows a lot of my students away. If you look at stories like A Good Man is Hard to Find, The Life You Save May Be Your Own, the characters in there are not particularly nice folk. You find that in all of her characters. One of the things that, when I was going back to prepare for this presentation today, I was looking at O'Connor's work and I was thinking of how many of her characters are so lonely and isolated. They live out in the middle of nowhere. Their lives are very unhappy. So it's not as if she paints this very rosy picture of human nature. And I think that's one of the things that I find intriguing about her is despite that darkness, there is still that sense of the divine, which is really kind of weird. People will think, well, if she's, when I saw her in the film clip, when she's characterized as a Catholic writer, yes, she is. But it's not a sort of simple, rosy, doctrinal Catholicism. And I think that if that's what you're looking for, you're not going to find that in O'Connor. O'Connor is this brilliant literary craftsperson whose vision of there may be divinity that informs the world, but there's a lot of darkness. There's a quote, if I may grab it real quickly. When I normally, excuse my notes, normally when you teach a story like A Good Man is Hard to Find, they do not include the epigraph to the collection.
Yeah.
And the epigraph to the collection is, "The dragon is by the side of the road, watching those who pass. Beware lest he devour you. We go to the Father of souls, but it is necessary to pass by the dragon." And that's sort of O'Connor in a nutshell. Why is it necessary to pass by the dragon? And she does have the dragon. If you look, yeah, and if you look at a story like A Good Man is Hard to Find itself, you have the character of the misfit who is in some way sort of a human embodiment, the modern embodiment of what the dragon is. So that's my little intro note on it.
Great intro. Lisa, where would you want to help us see how you approach Flannery O'Connor?
Well, for me, one of the things that hit me the first time that I ever met her stories and bowled me over was the way in which she combines the kind of canonical American realist fiction with the older tradition, almost of allegory and of a mystical view of the universe, so that you get this wonderful and unsettling melding of voices and traditions, and It's a very challenging text, too. I mean, any of her texts, so when you teach them in the classroom, you get people who read through and go like, yeah, I saw the hills had eyes, this sort of thing. And like, yeah, I've seen Carnival, I've seen, these sorts of things. And then, but they're still rather shocked sometimes by the unexpected violence and the combination of the violence that comes out of nowhere and this really dark humor, too. The humor of paradox, the humor of, I suppose, a divinity that is playing gotcha. Gotcha for your own good.
Yeah. And that's what we're going to do now, is see how religion and ethics, which gave us the idea to maybe do this program, let's roll that clip, Greg, and show for the next 8 minutes how scholars are looking at the greatness of Flannery O'Connor.
The great Southern Catholic writer Flannery O'Connor died in 1964, but her reputation continues to grow. This week, the complete stories of Flannery O'Connor was voted the best of all past fiction winners of the National Book Award. O'Connor specialized in grotesque, often violent characters whose Protestant fundamentalism was very different from O'Connor's Catholicism. But she always saw them as redeemed by God's grace, as Raphael P. Roman reports.
Even at the end of her short life, when it became harder and harder for her to walk, Flannery O'Connor went to Mass nearly every day at the Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Milledgeville in central Georgia. She lived with her mother in an old plantation house surrounded by 1,500 acres of pasture and woods. In her room after church, she would write all morning, facing the back of a tall chest, so that she would see no distractions. Her output was not massive: 2 short novels, 2 collections of short stories, a number of essays, and a lot of letters. But today, many consider her one of America's greatest writers. Since O'Connor's death, more than 50 books have been written about her, one of them by Ralph Wood of Baylor University.
Flannery O'Connor is the only great Christian writer this nation has produced. Now, that's an astonishing fact. Emerson, Thoreau, Hawthorne, Melville, Twain, Emily Dickinson, Frost, Stevens, not one of them Christian. At least not orthodoxly Christian. She's a Southerner and a Catholic. She's not at the center of American culture. And yet she is our only great Christian writer.
What makes her increasing popularity even more surprising in these secular times is the fact that O'Connor was a self-proclaimed Orthodox Catholic, whose subject, in her words, was the action of grace in territory held largely by the devil. O'Connor was the only child in a respected and well-off family. She was fascinated by birds of all kinds, and when she was a little girl, a newsreel cameraman came down to film a chicken Flannery claimed could walk backwards. Later on, her hobby centered on peacocks, a bird she saw as a personal symbol, according to her biographer, Brad Gooch.
I think she liked it because it was comic and gawky bird like herself. It ate her mother's flowers and kept everyone awake all night. And then at a certain transfigurative moment, the tails would open and here was all this beauty, which she saw as a symbol of the way her fiction worked. And also in the Middle Ages, the peacock was the symbol of Christ and the church. So, it all lined up for her in the peacocks.
As a young woman, O'Connor went to the Iowa Writers' Workshop, to the exclusive Yaddo Artist Colony in Saratoga Springs, and then to New York City and Connecticut, writing all the way. Then, at the age of 25, she was forced to return home because, like her father before her, she was dying of lupus. It was back in Georgia in the 1950s that she discovered the characters for her stories.
Not the cotton belt, not the tobacco belt, but the ugly word, the Bible Belt. And for O'Connor, that was the glory of her region. These were the emarginated people on the sidelines of Southern life in small, out-of-the-way places.
She wrote that her Christ-haunted characters are so cut off from Orthodox Catholicism that they don't have a guide, and that they're actually involved in a do-it-yourself religion that is kind of comical, sadly comical.
She saw, look, these are my brothers and sisters. They are as unlike me as they can be when it comes to the church and its sacraments, but they are a hold of a kind of sweated gospel, a gospel that takes God and God's world with the utmost seriousness. And therefore, I've got to attend to them. I cannot dismiss them, saying these are people after my own heart, and I want to write about them sympathetically.
Father Thomas Joseph White is a Dominican priest whose conversion to Catholicism was influenced by O'Connor's fiction.
You don't have baptism, confession, and the Mass, which she says are the center of her life. You have instead odd and grotesque, historically surprising events where people encounter the grace of God.
But Jesus died to redeem you. Can you understand?
From these people, her stories emerged. In Wise Blood and the Violent Bear It Away, and in 20 short stories, she told dark tales of murder and bigotry and madness, of a preacher of the church without Christ who puts out his own eyes. Some have asked, is this Christian?
He says most sins are committed by acts of immoderation, of excess. But he says there's one and one only quality that can never be sufficiently immoderate, and that's the love of God. And she saw in these backwoods Southern, I call them folk Christians more than fundamentalists, that kind of completely radical love of God in their own way.
Talk about the importance of grace and mystery in her work.
Mystery does not mean for her a kind of fuzzy, foggy, gooey, something or other. It's a very specific term for her. For her, the word mystery means that which is inexhaustible in our knowledge of God. That the deeper we go in understanding who the self-declared, self-revealed God is, the more there is yet to understand. So that the greater our knowledge of God, also the greater our ignorance of God. So that we know only a thumbnail of what and who God is.
As the civil rights movement changed attitudes and language, O'Connor was sharply criticized for using the N-word in her writing.
She couldn't change that word because that's the way those people speak.
For Flannery O'Connor, race was indeed the curse of the South, in the sense that it was the single most important test which we as white Christians failed. For O'Connor, the mistreatment of black people is a violation of their being creatures made in the image of God.
In recent years, O'Connor has become a favorite not only of writers and scholars, but of artists and entertainers of all stripes. For example, Bruce Springsteen, Bono, the Coen brothers, and even Conan O'Brien and the creators of the hit TV series Lost. Professor Bruce Gentry teaches at O'Connor's alma mater, Georgia College and State University, and edits the Flannery O'Connor Review.
She always talks about waking people up to the mystery of the world. And I think that puts her in a position that is similar to a lot of people in popular culture. You know, they want to create something substantial, but they also want to do it for a popular audience.
In the process of writing his biography of Flannery O'Connor, Brad Gooch says he came to admire her discipline and determination, particularly during the final months of her life.
She was staying alive through writing, and you see it at the end of her life, where it becomes a real race with death. She's working on stories which she keeps under her pillow in the hospital so the doctor won't take them away from her. She's editing one story after she's had last rites. So all of this seems to me very clear kind of sense that this is what's keeping her alive or why she's alive.
O'Connor's admirers wonder what her legacy will be in years to come. Some say that will depend on whether future readers will understand a writer who saw the action of grace in territory held by the devil. I'm Rafael P. Roman for Religion and Ethics Newsweekly.
KNXT thanks all its loyal viewers and respected businesses who have supported your Catholic television station. Now you can support KNXT with program underwriting by having your name, your company's name, or organization associated with your favorite program. Detailed information about you or your company will appear before and after each program or day part you select. Keep the quality and spiritual message alive and make a difference. Call 559-488-7440 today or go online at knxt.tv to find out more about program underwriting on KNXT.
Hello and welcome back to this exciting discussion about Flannery O'Connor. We just saw that segment from Religion and Ethics from a recent episode, and I think there were many statements which may not go uncontested. So why don't we begin? Lisa, was there anything that you would like to begin with, especially wondering if maybe not everything was according to your understandings of American literature?
Well, the one statement that took me off guard at first was that she's the only great Christian writer in the American tradition, and then there's a long list of names, and I'm thinking, but I could go through those texts and show you where they were going through and using biblical language, where there's biblical plot lines. It's certainly that they are very much in a Christian, particularly a Protestant Christian tradition. But I think that the truth of that statement, though, the part that I would agree with, Howard made it today, I don't know, is that certainly of particularly the writers of her generation and the writers of the generation immediately before her, and perhaps going back into the 19th century, she's one of the very few, if not the only American author I can think of who is so deeply concerned with theological questions. That the issues about the actions of grace, of how God operates in this world, about that return, so that her false prophet, her straying prophets, her Jonah figures, like the protagonist of Wise Blood, that's a plot line that a number of authors could have used, but her take on that, and her particularly sort of a Thomist Catholic take on that is unique.
Yeah, I want to follow up on the idea of it. One of the reasons that O'Connor is interesting to literary critics and to readers generally is because you can't just pigeonhole her. To say that she's a great Christian writer, fine, but she's not just that. Or to say that she writes about racism and the South, that's true, but it's not just about that. And the book that, of course, comes up as politically incorrect, the text is The Artificial Nigger, which is a fascinating text. The Artificial Nigger is, if I can find the passage here, sorry, I have to search for it. They find, it's like the equivalent of a jockey, okay? And it's all broken and bent up, and it says they ain't got Mr. Head, the grandfather, who earlier denies his son, but that's a whole nother story. They ain't got it. He says the reason there's this artificial nigger here out in this suburban area is they ain't got enough real ones here. They got to have an artificial one. And when you look at the story, it's so complex because what is blackness when they go, you have these two characters very isolated. The boy has never seen a black man. And when he first encounters one on the train, into town, because he was born in the city, but at a very young age, his mother, brought the kid back, and all kinds of problems with that. But when he first sees a real black man on the train, his response to what his father says, what can you say about that man? He says, it's just a man, okay? He has no concept of race at all. And his father says, no, that's a nigger, okay? And the story is partially about learning to be racist, learning to hate the urban environment, but it's also strangely about when the boy, when they're lost, and the grandfather won't admit that they're lost, and the grandfather is essentially playing a joke, a prank on his grandson, saying, my grandson fell asleep over here. I'm going to move over and see, he's got to respect how important I am to him, so I'm going to hide myself. But the kid, instead of just seeing that his grandfather is gone, the kid wakes up, is totally freaked out, runs away, and eventually crashes into a black woman. All right, and confronted by this wall of black women, the grandfather, Mr. Head, says that classic line, "This is not my boy. I never seen him before." He denies his son. Okay, and when I read this text, if you read it specifically, you can read it in terms of issues of race. You can read it also in terms of denials, biblical denials. My God, why have you forsaken me? Peter's denial I don't know the man, of Christ. All that's in there. So to say, well, she's just a Christian writer, she's just dealing with race, there's all this other stuff happening in the text. And that's one of the things that makes her interesting to us, is no matter how you try to pigeonhole her, The text is superabundant. The text is a superflux. You cannot just stop it, all right? Then to characterize her only as a Christian writer or only as a writer who is dealing with issues of race is not going to catch the whole of what Flannery O'Connor is about. And that's what makes her interesting to critics and to readers, is because there's so much more that goes. Now you can read other stories of hers that are more obviously dealing specifically with the issue of race, even if they don't have titles like The Artificial Nigger. Stories like All That Rises Must Converge, okay, which is a classic story about the tangled web of race in the South. But there's a lot going on there too, and it's all, in both cases, in both of those stories, it's seen through the lens of family relationships. And the families are dysfunctional, and the society is dysfunctional. You know, and you have all these levels of dysfunction in O'Connor, and then you have to ask, why? Why are so many of her families dysfunctional? Why are her societies dysfunctional? And that sort of hints at a distance from God. What's intriguing, if you read, when I was reading O'Connor and reading Merton for our back-to-back shows, in both of them, there seems to be this issue of your choices are a great loneliness in the world. You may be recognized in the world, but you're distanced from the divine, okay? Or you can experience a lonely greatness where you're distanced from the world, but you're in touch with the divine. And I think that in both of these writers, what you see increasingly is this split between, this rift between the spiritual and the material, such that these are the tough choices you're looking at, all right? The great loneliness of the modern world, because it is without God, okay? Or a sort of lonely greatness, which she achieves and which Merton achieves, but it's sort of, they're isolated too from the world. Yeah. It's very strange.
The isolation, the marginated
yeah.
figures. I mean, a lot of her figures are also people who have gone away for an education and have come back to the local scene. The son in All That Rises Must Converge, that's really anxious about his mother's racism. And then not able to deal with the fact that when his mother has the stroke or whatever it is that opens her mind up, that she's way beyond him. Yeah. The daughter in
Joy Hulga.
Yeah, who is you know like
Good Country People.
Good country people. And I mean, and it was just a horrible story. You know, like, frightening and for people reading it in a university, it's got to be a slap in the face. But then figures like Mary Grace, who throws her book on human development at the woman in Revelation. But I mean, to call Flannery O'Connor, as she's often called, a Southern writer, particularly, and Southern Gothic is one of the terms that's often thrown around. I mean, that's very limiting. I think she deals so much with the American pastoral, which is not just a Southern thing, and the dealing with the popular culture, because she takes on, in many cases, popular culture and larger American views of what the South is like, uses the stereotypes, turns them around, and throws them back in a really, really complex and tricky way, so that all of the pigeonholing doesn't work on her, which is perhaps why she is a great writer.
And Good Country People is the classic example of that. The Bible salesman, Manly Pointer.
Manly Pointer.
Who is this? He's a collector. He collects
eyeballs,
eyes, prosthetic legs. And the whole thing, this whole notion of what are good country people, that sort of, he says, I've gotten a lot of interesting things. One time I got a woman's glass eye this way, and you needn't to think you'll catch me because Pointer ain't really my name. I use a different name at every house I call at and don't stay nowhere long. And I'll tell you another thing, Hulga, he said, using the name as if he didn't think much of it, you ain't so smart. I've been believing in nothing ever since I was born. And that's my thing, because she's nihilism, and she believes that she got this degree in philosophy to believe in nothing, and she believes in him. She believes in his religious faith to save him from nothingness.
And she's trying not to believe, the same as the protagonist of Wise Blood. That's refusing the call to be.
You know what's
I've been believing in nothing since the day I was born.
What's so interesting is seeing two people who actually not only teach this stuff, but actually enjoy it, and to know that you can enjoy it too. Of course, it's not going to be a pleasant ride. It's very disturbing. And I would say start by trying to track down 3 by Flannery O'Connor. That's one way to go,
Yeah.
is to get a collection. It's got the novels, it's got
Collection of short stories.
These short stories that we referred to, they're all in here. All of those ones that have been dealt with, they're all in here, as they say. And what was interesting in the clip, this quote that says that for her, in a very interesting way, the action of grace is going to happen in territory held by the devil.
Mm-hmm.
So there is none of this cavalier approach to religion. There's none of this fundamentalism from her point of view, I mean. There's nothing that's easy. It's harsh, but it's real. And I wonder if in the last few minutes there's something that you didn't get to say yet, but you know it's one more thing in the last 2 or 3 minutes that you know you'd like to share. Lisa.
It's the chronological setting. This is Flannery O'Connor is very much the text that she's writing, and perhaps her view of the action of grace in a world surrounded by evil is very Cold War. Cold War, post World War II, post Korea War. Sense of a world that doesn't know where it's going in the future, that has lost a lot of its old verities and is having trouble finding new ones. And that's a statement, I think, that one of the reasons why it's picked up by people like Springsteen and even Lost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to think, and when it mentioned these icons of, I mean, Conan O'Brien is like in the news, and what's so interesting is that they would be, and the Coen brothers, it makes sense. The Coen brothers, I can see. Howard, final thought.
And this is going to return to something that Lisa said earlier. I think one of the appeals that it has for thoughtful people in popular culture is that it's that tension between religious faith and a realization of the darkness of the world. But what's peculiar about her characters is they will just pop up with the weirdest things.
Oh, yeah.
She never gives short shrift, so to speak, to her characters. Mr. Shiflett in The Life You Say May Be Your Own, he says, what I've got is I've got a moral intelligence. And this is a guy who just comes off the street, says ain't all the time, but I've got a moral intelligence.
Speaking of that, we'll be back next week with a great conscience, Thomas Merton. Join us then.